how beer is made. So we're constantly evolving, and I just want to give a little bit of insight of how I got in the industry, what we do in our lab for benefit of yeast, on our day-to-day, on our 15-barrel system, on our pilot system, which is about a 10-gallon system, and on our 60-barrel system that we regularly ferment 2,000 to 8,000 gallons on a daily basis. So if you guys have any questions, this is about y'all. I tend to ramble a lot, so apologies in advance. But yeah, so to start out, basically who I am how I got into the industry. I was a nerd, as a lot of us tend to be, when I was in college, and still am, and got my degree in exercise physiology from Appalachian State before there was an actual fermentation program there. So I missed about a couple years. While I was in school, I did a lot of studying in fermented arts, mostly in consuming them. And I really didn't like beer altogether until some of my friends started coming and bringing some out-of-state beers. Because when I was in school, the cap was still in effect, where basically you couldn't brew or sell beer over 5% alcohol in North Carolina. In my last year or two, that popped to 15%. And then all these other breweries started coming in. Because if you think about it, back in the day, when Dogfish Head was around selling in different states, just an example, over half their entire category is over 6% alcohol. So why would they even come to North Carolina if they can't sell the majority of their stuff? So once the cap opened up, you had guys like Bell's and Founders and Dogfish Head and a lot of these exciting, cool breweries, Avery and everything like that coming in. And I got exposed to that, but not only the beers themselves, but also the people that represented the breweries, the salespeople, the reps, the brewers, and the owners, and everything like that. I was like, this is the coolest culture I ever got into, and I was like, that's what I want to do. Unfortunately, I was getting a degree in physiology, so I was like, well, I guess I'll just go into it the old-fashioned way. You read enough things about like how Allagash started, or how Dogfish Head started, and stuff like that. I was like, those guys didn't have degrees in any of it either. I'm just gonna get out there and do it. And basically started homebrewing pretty aggressively. Like I never did a prepackaged recipe. I basically researched it for a while, helped a few friends in college homebrew, and then I was like, I'm just going to build my own recipe, and did a couple of stovetops, moved to full batch boils, and then did all grain within the first year, and was brewing 1 to 3 times a week. And it's just crazy stuff, just like just anything I could think of. And when I moved to Charlotte, I was like, there's so many bars here, and there's so few craft beer knowledge going on. And me and a few other guys that got together, that were mostly transplants from really cool beer locations, were like, this is enough. The only dark beer isn't just Guinness. Like, we have to go out there and tell people about it. So we basically would go to all these different bars where they had the reps from these different distributing companies that were coming in with this new product, like oh, we got Terrapins, Wake and Bake, and stuff like that. And we would be like, we know what that is, and we know what these ingredients are. And a lot of the distributing reps back then too were mostly wine oriented, so they were kind of learning it too. And we're like, we'll host like a club meeting here, or we'll do like a Q&A or like a homebrew talk or whatever on the ingredients that are going in here, and we'll promote the beer. And like, well, what do you want? I'm like, we don't want anything. We just want to tell people that there's better options out there. So I moved in like 12 years ago. If a bar had Sam Adams, it was a crazy beer bar. And we're like, this is, it's obviously changed pretty dramatically. I got around a lot, like Sammy said. That sounds awful. And I ended up being at a bar at Pizza Peel in Cotswold. And I was sitting at the bar, and 2 spots down from me was a couple, a little bit older than I was, and I was a couple beers in. And therefore I had more courage than I normally would. And I heard the husband and the couple say that something about him growing hops in his yard, so I just rudely interrupted them and started a conversation. We started homebrewing together. They wanted to leave their jobs, and they invested their entire retirement fund to make what is now known as Noda Brewing Company. Before it had a name, they came to me and they're like, you seem crazy enough to want to do this for a living, do you want to be our brewer? So I screamed, fuck yeah. Like in the middle of a restaurant, and left the medical industry. And built Noda out from ground up, and I've been a brewer since day one. Became the 3rd co-owner at our 3rd anniversary. So that's who I am. It's been the hardest and by far most rewarding job I've ever had. And it all started from a love and passion for home brewing, so kudos to you guys. The more you guys get together and do stuff like this, the more the energy and the positivity builds. There's tons of information out there. There's tons of people that have been brewing for way longer than I've been able to drink out of, anything beyond a bottle. So you can definitely find a plethora of knowledge out there. Just talk about the yeast subject. I don't even normally use this whiteboard, but I might doodle some stuff on there in a little bit. But oh, there's the pins. Just right in below there. We run a 60-barrel brew house. And we brew on it usually about 3 to 4 days a week, anywhere between 1 to 4 turns a day. 1 turn is 1 batch turn on it. this is sort of the stuff that we do day to day on it. And I'm going to tell you the general idea of what we have, and then we'll kind of pick apart some stuff that you can actually do at your home or do some sort of derivative of it. Because a lot of people think that whatever the labs at a big, professional scale brewery that's doing thousands of gallons at a time, like there's no way I can do that. You can actually do a lot of the same sort of stuff. So, and if you want to interrupt with a question, by all means, let me have it. So, day in and day out, we monitor all fermentations every single day. So we take samples from every single tank that's in fermentation process, whether it's in conditioning, cleanup, or it's begun its first fermentation the day beforehand. The reason why we do that is even after 6 years of brewing, we still feel that we can track our fermentation process more accurately. We take the gravity of it. We do measure everything in Plato, but it's a pretty simple conversion to gravity, specific gravity, or Brix, depending on what you want to use. We also take pH of the beer. We can basically chart that out. The pH drop and rise is very indicative of where in the path of the attenuation the beer is going to be. Once the beer is done, we then start doing the process called VDK testing. By done, I mean it's hit its terminal gravity, so it's no longer moving. When we do VDK testing, we actually use a spectrophotometer, which is a pretty expensive piece of equipment to actually get a numeric value that tells us the concentration of the VDK or bisphenol diketone in it. What is bisphenol diketone? Does anyone know? It's the predecessing portion to diacetyl, the biggest homebrewer known off flavor of all time. So one of the biggest fears for a lot of, especially home brewers, but also pro brewers as well, is that you're going to release a beer and it's going to taste awesome, and 2 weeks later when you get it on a shelf, it tastes like a butterscotch bomb. So VDK basically by itself doesn't taste like anything. When you add it to heat and or oxygen, you convert it into diacetyl. So when you package the product, no matter if you put it in a keg or in a bottle or in a can, you're going to reintroduce some sort of oxygen into it. It's just the nature of moving fluid. When that oxygen gets in there and it saturates it in for a while, and especially if it sits on a room temperature shelf, you're going to convert that VDK into diacetyl, unless there's not enough VDK in it to allow the diacetyl to be perceived by your palate. So the way you get rid of it is just let the beer sit. And that's why so many people, when they homebrew especially, they're like, all right, I brewed my batch, I'm going to let it sit in there for a month. And then I might cold crash, I might move it over to another vessel or something like that. Most beers, if they're pitched with the appropriate amount of yeast, don't really take that long to hit your terminal gravity. Our average, like our hop, drop, and roll, which is a 7.2% alcohol beer, starts out at 16 Plato or 1066 gravity, takes about 4 to 5 days to go from 16 to 2.4. Completely attenuate out. It's then the conditioning portion of it when we test this sort of diketone concentration where we're like, all right, now it's ready to move on. You don't have to let it sit there for a month or 2 months or however much you need to do. If you actually can test it, then you know, yep, there's not enough in there for us to proceed. Let's go on and crash it, move it on to packaging. So it tightens it up. Usually our hop, drop, and roll stays in the tank for about 2.5 weeks altogether. And that's including with dry hopping and everything like that. Some of our beers that are smaller, like Cadu, it can hit terminal in 3 days and be out within the next week. So it's really fast. Now, most of you probably don't have a spectrophotometer at home. Here's an easier way to do it. And even though we use the spectrophotometer, we still do a sensory taste on it every single time because the spectrophotometer's number that it gives us for VDK is completely independent to the type of beer we're doing. So with a hop, drop, and roll, our concentration on it, just to give you a ballpark, it has to be under 0.09 to be passing. We know that after about 4 months of constantly trialing it. For Gorgeous, our pumpkin beer that has a ton of malts and is really, thick and sweet and everything like that, it can withstand a 0.158 and you can't tell any diacetyls in it at all. So it's completely dependent. The way you find that out is just taking a sample, putting it in a little clean jar, steeping it in hot water for about 45 minutes, and hot water preferably around 150 or higher, and then you cool it down and open it up. Smell diacetyl? Yes, no. Take a sip. Can you taste diacetyl? Yes, no. If you don't taste it or smell it, there's not enough VDK in there after you superheating it and exposing it to oxygen to move on. So if you have the ability to take clean samples from your carboy or your fermenters or whatever you have, you can just take a little couple ounce samples. As long as you can sip on it, it's enough. And you just submerge it in a hot water bath for 45 minutes, and you should give it enough heat to convert that VDK over. So that's one thing that I think it saved a lot of headache and timing or worry and like, has it conditioned long enough or is it time to dry hop? You can test it along when you're trying to test your gravity on it to go ahead and pull a sample. If it hasn't moved on gravity for 4 or 5 days, go ahead and dunk it in some hot water. You can actually find out a lot of what's actually going on with it there. And if you have a pH meter too, that's an easy thing you can do. If you see it dropping down from like 4.8 after its first day, several days later it's at like 4.3, and then all of a sudden it's back up to 4.5, more than likely it's going to get in its final stopping point somewhere in that little realm. Another thing that we tend to do is we count cells on our yeast. And so one of the biggest things, like one of the big problems I think in the beer industry is that there's two kind of cultures of yeast handling. There's the maniacal mad scientist way where you have to like pressure wash every single thing that is involved in the process of it, and then there's the whole like, just let it kind of be natural and everything like that. The problem is that if you want to truly control how your beer is going to ferment, you need to control every single part of the process. You know how many cells you're putting in your wort, you know the gravity of your wort, the pH of your wort, temperature that you're going to ferment it in. You need to know all these things, and every single thing along the way has to be perfectly clean and perfectly sanitized. There's also been hundreds of years of people brewing amazing beer that literally didn't even know what yeast was, and it just happened to sit in a room, and Saccharomyces wins the battle almost every single time. So, should you clean your stuff super thoroughly and keep it sanitized? Absolutely, because you're controlling those factors. But there's a lot of times where if you are worried about something going wrong or whatever, don't worry completely like all the way through. Like if you happen to like, if the air block goes dry for a day and you didn't catch it, if the yeast was prepped right to go in there, you know the right cell count, whatever, the Saccharomyces is a pretty strong bug. They usually can fight most things off. Brettanomyces is a little bit more resilient, obviously, but most things that can spoil the beer and actually be a harmful thing to drink can't survive the fermentation activity that you can get from Saccharomyces. It's literally genetically made to eat beer product. So we count our cells. We use just a normal microscope for it. I know that's expensive, but compared to a lot of other tools that we use, it's pretty easy to get a microscope for a home use. The other big tool in that is a thing called a hematometer. Does anyone know what that is? Has anyone ever used one before? Awesome. It's basically a fancy slide. It's a slide that they usually use to count red blood cells, which is why it's named as a hematometer. It's a blood counter. So basically, it's just a grid. It's got two little slits in it. You basically put a little film on it, like you do with any other slide, and you're basically going to make a dilution concentration for your yeast. You take a little bit of yeast. If you have a conical fermenter, this is really easy. Or if you want to make a starter and you want to see if the starter is big enough, you can just take a small sample. You put a milliliter in, say, 100 milliliters, and you can dilute it down. And then take methyl blue, which is also not really that expensive. It's expensive if you buy it in bulk, but if you're only doing it every now and then, it's really not expensive. You just drop one little drop in it, turn it blue, and methyl blue will actually dye the cells, walls of your cells that are healthy and living, and it will penetrate through the ones that are dead. So the ones that are dead will look like dark little blue dots, and the ones that are nice and alive will be these little blue circles. They're really cute. And then you put them on the little hematometer slide, which has a bunch of grids in it, and it will basically, the little slits that are in there will suck it underneath the little slide, and then you can throw it on your microscope, and you can literally look in these quadrants of squares and count, you know, like left corner, right corner, right corner, bottom left, bottom right, and in the middle, and basically sum up how many live cells you have and how many dead cells you have. If you do the percentage of how many are alive to dead, that's your viability. So that gives you a reference on like, oh, we have an 82% viability. That's not good yeast. Or like, hey, there's not a single dead cell on the thing. I saw one dead cell on the entire grid. It's like, that yeast is rocking. Let's go ahead and run with it. But you can also do simple calculations. If you go online, they're pretty easy. Just extrapolating out how big is your batch size, how strong is your beer. You can, yes, go ahead.
So as you're harvesting your yeast, do you ever see, you get to a point where you've got less and less viability and you just say that yeast is done, we've got to reset?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends. You're talking about generations pitching. So we do starters and we do cone to cones. Is what we ultimately do with all of theirs. So we don't grow them up from like a single little pack. We basically are going to harvest it off of an existing cone that is a finished beer, or we're going to actually build it up off of a fresh pitch. The bottom of a conical fermenter, and more or less a normal carboy, is almost always going to be dead yeast, because that's the stuff that's going to flocculate or fall out of suspension right away. That yeast didn't come really to play anyways. You know, it's down bottom, you don't want that. The stuff that's in the middle, after fermentation done, is awesome yeast. That's really where most of the daughter cells, so basically every time you pitch the yeast in, they're going to split off, they're going to multiply, they're going to propagate up. The second generation on that, or third generation, actually has genetic memory of its food source from its mother cells, so they tend to be the most viable ones. A lot of professional breweries usually kind of cut off once they get around like 6 generations. With us, it just depends on how our schedule works on it and whatnot. So we've gone as high as like 9 generation pitches, but most of the time we'll go 4 or less. Because after a while, the cells still look good, but their viability is not as high. Their cell count tends to be not as high as well. You can't stretch one line indefinitely forever and expect the exact same amount of cell viability or vitality. One thing we can't test is vitality. A lot of people don't know there's a difference between viability and vitality. Viability is literally just how many cells are alive. Vitality is how likely are those live cells going to propagate, which is a little bit more higher tech equipment that we need to have at the brewery. So we pick from the middle of the cone. For those of you that have normal carboys, one sort of practice you can do with this is called washing yeast. So basically you can take your finished beer off of the true pile itself. The very bottom of that true pile, like I said, is the stuff you don't want. It's basically sediment, basically yeast byproduct and yeast that didn't want to play anyways. You can basically boil up, sanitize some water. Sometimes people will throw a little bit of yeast nutrient in it too. Cool it down in the fridge, and then basically can pour off the yeast trub into the container with the clean water and just let it settle at room temperature, and eventually the living yeast will kind of separate out from the dead trub, and you can then pour that onto your next batch. I didn't do that a lot when I was home brewing. I did do some cone-to-cone racking where I just racked on top of it, but it was only for like pretty strong beers I also supplemented another yeast with. But you can easily wash. I know several guys that have done it. We don't do it for us at the brewery itself because we have the conicals. We can basically dump the bottom portion of the trub itself, go on and get it off there, and then harvest the good stuff after that. We also have a tank that's a 7.5 barrel tank that we use to dry hop beers with. It's called the hop egg. I don't know why this is what it's called. Where you can actually grab however much volume, because we actually have like a sight beam in there, so we can look through this little window and see exactly how many barrels we got after we count the yeast cell volume that we need, and then inject that straight into the beer once the work has actually gotten into it. The other big thing that I would recommend is doing starters. We do starters. We've done starters since homebrew days all the way up to now. We actually brewed a starter today for the batch I'm doing tomorrow at 5 in the morning. So basically with that, we will do either a DME, if it's a small starter, or an all-grain starter, where we just brew a really super simple beer. And so you can even do them on the stove top, no matter what size system you have in your garage or whatever. And you just want to get some form of volume that you know the yeast is going to grow in. So usually we gun for about 10.5 degree Plato to 13 degree Plato as far as the gravity. And if we're doing a beer that's really hoppy, we will throw a little bit of like the hop that's going to be really heavily featured in the final product beer into the beer as well. Yep.
So Chad, using a dry yeast, in a 5 gallon batch. So
Dry yeast?
A dry yeast in a 5 gallon batch. Would you do a starter for that, or just hydrate it in a homebrew situation? You
can hydrate the dry yeast. I don't use a whole lot of dry yeast. We used a few of them though when we were doing repitches in our old system back in the first year or two. Those usually just rehydrate and you can pitch in right after that. They're kind of a different procedure on it. I mostly do white yeast or white labs yeast for everything that I was doing with homebrewing and whatnot, but you can do just a rehydration with that. I don't think you should do. I think you shouldn't do if you do a starter with the dry yeast, I think you still should rehydrate it first and then pitch it, and you would have to use it in a larger volume as well.
Is there a White Lab rep in the Charlotte area now? Or,
yes, yeah. Or at least he covers the Charlotte area. I don't know if he lives here or not, but his name's Pablo.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, he's a real nice guy. They're super responsive. We talk to them every week about any sort of questions we got, and obviously on orders and whatnot. But they're now obviously stationed up in Asheville, so they're super easy for us to communicate with. But yeah, so with the starters, if you're going to do a 10-gallon batch or something of that nature, doing a 1 liter starter in the 10 to 12 Plato range, which is like a 1048, ish to 1048 gravity. Throw some hops in there if you need to or whatnot, and then basically cool it down and then pitch your yeast on that and keep it agitated and oxidated if you can. If you can't put like a carving stone with oxygen on it, you can literally spray and sanitize off like a tinfoil wrapper, aluminum foil wrapper, and just put it over like an Erlenmeyer flask and just keep it agitated the whole time. And then the next day you can usually brew off of that if you obviously can't do the
Okay, so another question. On the starter, some people, when let's say you're doing a 1 or a 2 liter starter, and you're agitating, for like 24 or whatever hours beforehand.
Right.
Some people recommend, some readings, they've just done the whole 2 liters in. I just say cold crash it overnight, and then take the oxygenated, sort of wort off the yeast, and only go with the slurry on the bottom.
I think both are fine depending on how much wort you use to make the starter. If it's a pretty significant volume, and say you only had like an 8-gallon pull on your final batch and you still had like a 2 liter starter, I would probably try to pour off as much as just the finished wort and then dump the actual slurry of it in. You also get in that weird point where it's like, how much can I shake this early amount of flask to get all the yeast actually out of it, where it's not like you can CO2 blast it like we can. But yeah, I think that it's better. If you can isolate the yeast that you've grown, it's always going to be better, unless you literally brewed a little mini batch of something that's really super similar to what you're already having being made in the actual product itself. But basically, when you're doing the starters like that, the best analogy I have with it is like taking, you say you get your White Labs pack of little push pop tubes that they come in with now, and you brew your batch, it's been sitting, warming up a little bit, cut it open, just slop it in there. It's kind of like taking a toddler and just pushing it into an all-you-can-eat buffet and be like, go get it, tiger, and just hoping for the best. Whereas if you build up a yeast starter for at least a 24-hour span of time, giving it room to grow, giving it some oxygen to feed off of. If you can count cells, that'd be a great thing to do. But it's basically like pushing a high school kid that just got off of football practice into an all-you-can-eat buffet and seeing what happens. It's just a much more immediate start. But also the less amount of lag time you have between when the fermentation, before you pitch to when you actually see fermentation start is going to be really good. There's less off-flavor potential when you have a pretty quick fermentation start altogether. You're probably going to have a really ample cell count, which also means you're going to get a more dependable drop in attenuation, but you also get a very dependable cleanup. If your beer is struggling to get down to attenuation levels, that ambient yeast is already really stressed out by the time it gets there, so it's going to take it longer to actually clean up. Which again, if you're able to take a little sample out and test it and heat it in a little bath or whatever, it's a great way to kind of give you a threshold on like, is this yeast actually still struggling to clean it up, or is it actually already made clean beer?
Okay, so
Yes.
there's another question. If you normally consider about 20 billion cells for an ale and about 40 billion for a lager, can it actually overpitch?
Yes, you can overpitch. Lagers are hard to overpitch. You have to really try. And if you have a really high gravity beer too, you don't usually need to you can put a lot of yeast on it. As like when we make our Monstro, which is like a 28-degree Plato starting beer, we count to make sure the yeast looks good, and like just throw all of it we got in there and just like push as much of it as we can. You can't overpitch that. If you're doing a generic beer and you're throwing 120 billion cells into an ale that starts out at 10-degree Plato, you just don't really need that. It can mess up your fermentation profile, and also especially if you're trying to, which was another point I wanted to make as well, when you're trying to make a beer that is dependent on having an estery or phenolic profile of any kind, like a Belgian ale or like a British ale that has a lot more ester character to it, the more ample amount of yeast that you're putting into it, the less the yeast has to grow, therefore the less amount of stress it's under, and therefore the less amount of ester and phenolic profile you're going to get. A lot of times when we pitch our Belgian beer strains, we actually underpitch them purposely, so they actually have to struggle to get their cell count up, which causes that stress to get there, and you get a lot of those great acetate flavors and things like that, the banana, the clove. We also don't even set the temperature jackets on it. Most of our beers our IPAs and our pale ales, we set our fermentation right at 67 degrees when it starts out, and as it finishes up, we'll let it ramp to like 74 to clean up a little bit faster. With our Belgians, we just put them in the tank at 65 and just say, go at it. The Saisons will get over 90 degrees, but that stress for that active, temperature going on, if you have the ability for the cells to get super active and be under those stressful conditions, you're going to pull a lot more of those flavors off. If you're not going for those flavors, those are bad things, obviously. You don't want to sit there and underpitch a double IPA and then like, just let it get to 90 and see what happens, and you won't enjoy that. But if you're trying to make something that really exudes those sorts of flavors and you overpitch on it, you're not going to get the same sort of performance out of it. You ask something?
Well, I was just going to say, since the byproducts of yeast is alcohol and carbon dioxide, what's the difference of the yeast? I mean, how does that change the flavor?
They react differently on one lager versus ale. They obviously are the genetics on the actual yeast itself are going to dictate how it's going to perform under certain temperatures and certain food concentrations as well. Different genetic varieties of the yeast also will have different tolerances to alcohol level. They will have different tolerances to pH. They have different levels in which they can fully attenuate for it too. So there's some yeast out there that actually are less attenuative, or they don't eat as much as percentage-wise as other yeast will. There's also certain yeast, like in the Belgian strands, that they're, I don't know how it came about that they were able to isolate the genes on them all that together, but obviously most yeast are named from the region they're harvested from originally, and they're just able to replicate their DNA sequences. And basically a lot of varieties, especially in Europe, tend to give off higher percentages of specific esters and phenols, which are the fruity and spicy characters. You look at most American harvest yeast, they're a little bit cleaner. you really have to try to make them push those sorts of flavors out. They usually let just the baseline sort of, yeast character come through. And then you have a lot of English ones that can kind of be like musky, like, they're not really English, but Edinburgh, the Scottish yeast, has a very musky, basementy sort of character to it, which sounds disgusting, but it is appropriate for the style. So depending on how you set the temperatures and what you gave it to eat, plus what variety of yeast you put in there, you're going to get a different result on it. Which is one of the reasons why I think one of the best beers for people to start brewing when they first start out is Belgians, because you can, as long as you can give it some yeast to eat, or if you also give yeast some food to eat, aka pretty simplistic upfront malt, not a whole lot of hops, and just kind of let it go crazy, it usually gives you a pretty fun beer because the natural byproduct of that yeast is really fun flavors. As long as it's clean and not infected and stuff like that, obviously. But that's one of those reasons why I like to have it. Yeah.
So, do you ever notice like a variation between yeast that you get from White Labs?
Yeah, we actually get little sidecars with them. We request them so we can run tests with them. There's not a whole lot of variance. It's very consistent. When they tell you it's this pitch rate, it's almost always that.
Taste-wise, it's like your beer has to taste the same every time.
Yeah, we do a QA panel every day or so that actually tastes the beers as they're fermenting down and when they go into final pack.
Next question, who's on the QA panel?
Myself, our lab guy, and then usually my right-hand brewer as well. And I do trainings as well. It sounds like it's a lot of fun. It's really not. We get super nitpicky, and most of the beers are in mid-fermentation, or they're the VDK samples that we have to do, and they just taste awful because they're not ready. So occasionally you're like, oh man, that's awesome. That's gonna be a great beer. And then probably 80% of the time, it's like, who's ready to try a beer? And we're all like, oh, I have something else to do. So they really don't. After they get excited at first, and then after they go to like 2 weeks with the QA panel, they're like, oh, this actually kind of sucks. And it's like, yeah, that gives us a profile though on like where we know when everything is supposed to move to the next level. Yes.
What kind of software do you guys use? Do you use software with your checking viability counts?
Yeah, we just use Microsoft Excel. We basically write in formulas so that basically instead of having to like calculate it out on paper every single time, we just built in the formulas being like, hey, how many cells did you get total? How many of them were dead? And then it goes, here's your viability. What was the gravity of your beer you're going for? What's the volume on it? And it was like, you need this much volume if this is your cell count. And that's basically it. We actually have one little cube in it that says like, pitch it or don't pitch it, like in like big like comedic letters and stuff like that. And then for our day-to-day stuff, we run this system that's actually based out of Charlotte called Ecos. And that's basically our total inventory. We don't have any yeast profiling on there except for just we have like a notes tab for every one of our beers, so we can put in there its VDK saturation levels, its cell counts, if we have to repitch it, if we popped a cone to try to resuspend yeast or anything like that, or anything that's of note. But there's nothing in that software intrinsically designed for the yeast itself. Yes.
Mixing the yeast strands in a single batch.
You gotta be kind of picky on that. There's a lot of people that really like to do it, and it's fun. There's nothing really wrong with doing it. The difference is like, for professional brewers, it's kind of problematic because it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do my own custom yeast blend, and it's like, you know that one of them is gonna act differently than the other one potentially. So they flocculate slightly differently. You don't know what the blend is you're harvesting off. If you're doing a one-off, it's fine. But a lot of times, one of the yeast tends to be the dominant pair in the two. So if you're doing two pretty similar types, it's not really that big of a risk. It's not something you want to constantly harvest off of. You're not going to get like repeatable batches off of that one strand unless you just prep the yeast each time the same way as the first one. So it's not something you want to harvest off of. I wouldn't recommend at least. But if you want to play around with it, I think it's a fun thing to do. It's just, you tend to have one that kind of wins the battle, so to speak.
With my higher gravity beers, I usually use a champagne yeast. And then go to...
You can also add the champagne yeast too to kind of finish off the fermentation if the yeast is starting to kind of lag down and get too tired and you want to dry it out a little bit further. You can usually prime up the champagne yeast and pitch that in as well. And usually the ester and phenolic character is well developed at that point because the beer is almost completely done on its normal Saccharomyces yeast, and then the champagne can just dry it out a little bit. Yeah. Good time. Okay.
So we just need to pause and restart the camera just for a second.
I got to start over from the very beginning. Take XYZ volume of sample, dilute it down with this, distill out this much of it, and then you put it in these super toxic little vials and stick them in there, and it just shoots light through it, and it tells you the VDK on it. The spectrometers have like 80 different functions they can do. It's ridiculous. Like we only have like 4 that are applicable to us, and they're like, "Oh, you guys can do SRM." I'm like, "Yeah, we also have eyes, so we don't really need to do that." So SRM is the color, if anyone knows. They're like, "You can tell how deep of an amber it is. Yeah.
There's some beginners in the room here. What's the best advice you can give with regard to yeast that you can give to brand new brewers?
Keep everything super clean. Going back to that idea, like the more stuff you have clean, the more stuff you can technically control. And start to look at how to do starters. They really make a big difference if you're going to use a liquid yeast. And I assume most brewers I know, most home brewers tend to use the liquid yeast overall. There's a lot of videos on YouTube you can look at. And just online in general. Making a starter is super simple, but seeing it done in front of you makes it just really easy. Like, oh, that's all I need to do. That can really prime the yeast up. And if you're going to brew the next morning, you know you're pitching good quality yeast in each time. Other than that, just keep everything super sanitary. And don't be afraid to check the beer. As long as you can spray stuff off with any sort of sanitizer, whether you're using iodophor or we use peroxyacetic. And honestly, like if you can. One of the best sanitizers that I wish I had known about when I was homebrewing is just taking 70% isopropyl alcohol and put a little spray nozzle on it. We spray everything down with that. Don't do what we do though, because we burn stuff after that too. That's kind of like the ultimate, it can't live in this environment, but you obviously don't even burning and like everything in your house. But isopropyl, you spray stuff down, take a little sample in a clean method, and then seal it back up and heat it up, take a taste, do whatever you want to do. It's okay to taste fermenting beer. It gives you an idea of what's going on. And if all of a sudden it starts tasting tart and tasting really funky and it wasn't supposed to, then you know in advance before it goes south.
Do you like Star San?
I did back in the day. We haven't used it in forever, but it's just too foamy for pro brewers, you know.
So do you oxygenate your beer any during the beginning of fermenting?
We do not we oxygenate in line when we're knocking it out. Knocking out is going from the actual brewing system through the pipeline to the actual fermenter. It's getting saturated with oxygen. I was actually just talking to Sammy about this earlier. This is a little bit more advanced, but like we do incremental oxidation dial down. So basically, as a rule of thumb, it's like you want to basically put 1 part per million of oxygen in per however many Play-Doh you have as the original gravity. So, for example, our hop, drop, and roll 16 Play-Doh beer, I try to get myself and my guys to nail between 14 and 18 parts per million on our oxidation that we push into, which is a pretty aggressive oxidation. If you can only oxygenate with like filtered air, that's fine too. Like you'll get enough to help it out some.
Because why I ask is like when we go from the fermenter to the keg, should you prep the keg by like blasting it with CO2, keeping the oxygen out?
Yeah, you want to keep the oxygen out. Oxygen is your best friend. Is a great ally when you're putting it into the fermenter to start fermenting. Because one of my favorite quotes about beer, because it sounds super nerdy, is all yeast. It's about yeast basically. So all organic material will respirate when given oxygen unless they are suffocated out by another source. I really butchered that. So what it basically means is that when you throw yeast into wort that's not oxygenated, it's got all this food around it, but it has no like drive to do anything else besides just eat it in order to survive. So it just kind of does its own thing. When you add oxygen to it, the yeast will sense that oxygen is there and it knows it needs to respirate, but it's got all this food all over the place that's basically overwhelming the oxygen source. So the first thing it wants to do is start propagating its numbers up. So that oxygen basically is the kickstarter to make the propagation happen. The numbers of the cells get up and start eating all the sugar to get it out of the way so they can go ahead and start breathing. And then after that point, you're entering an anaerobic environment. So you're dispelling oxygen as the CO2 is produced.
And that's where the starter comes in so good that they're ready to get
yeah, they're already ready to roll. They're already primed up, basically. But once the beer is in the fermentation process, the less oxygen you can put to it, the better. So yeah, purging anything out with CO2 is a great method to do. If you have any sort of CO2 gun or anything like that can help, like just by purging, or even just like when you open up the fermenter, just to blast a little bit of CO2 in it, just to keep that little pillow of CO2 that's naturally made from the fermentation process intact. That's great. I mean, oxygen's our enemy past the fermenter. You know, it's the thing that we absolutely cannot stand to have in here because it will just ruin your shelf life and give you lots of off flavors as well.
And then if you leave it in the fermenting for 7 to 10 days and you see that the gravity has went from say 1060 whatever down to 1012, and it's pretty much done its job, and you leave it in there, say, another 3 weeks,
Right.
I kind of heard kind of the cleanup,
The cleanup shouldn't take that long. And
Oh, but
honestly,
you're lazy, you know, you really just can't get back over and check it real quick, you know?
but the thing is, you know, ultimately, I say a bunch of this stuff. If you're already doing that to make it better, you know, bottom line is you're trying to have fun with it and everything like that. But if you're trying to make a better product, the longer you're leaving it in a plastic or steel, it's very hard to completely seal like a homebrew fermentation vessel unless you have a really high-end fermenting, not even cardboard, but everything's like semi-permeable.
Yeah.
So if you're just sitting there, like as the beer is fermenting away, the CO2 is actively pushing stuff out, you know? And if it's sitting there inactive, you have a CO2 little, you know, barrier there. Let's say if it's in a bucket, you're in this plastic bucket, it's fairly well sealed off, but the longer it sits there after it's done cleaning up, you're not giving it any better, you know, chances without moving it to another vessel or something like that and let it age further. Like if you're gonna age it, you're better off
Well,
going
that's
and putting
why I asked
it in a
about
product,
when
you
you
know?
keg, about getting the oxygen out, just so you finally keg it.
Yes.
And, you know, when you clean the keg, you put the top on, and that's all you did.
Right. It's better to go ahead and get some, like fill the whole thing up with CO2 and purge it out. Pretty much anytime we're doing any final product to any sort of vessel, we do at least 3 10 PSI purges on everything, or whatever the PSI rating of the thing is you're about to put it into. I don't want someone blowing up their kegs or whatever, but like most of our stainless steel tanks, we purge it 3 times at least before we put any sort of finished product in it. Even when we're dry hopping with our egg, it's well purged.
Because we store our kegs along with the fermenter
Right.
at 67, 68 degrees, and it almost seemed like sometimes we would have a keg that would just blow up. You couldn't even take the top off the keg without foam just oozing out of it.
It's picked up some sort of secondary fermentation. Either it woke back up from the transfer and it wasn't done, or there's something in there that kind of helped instigate a little bit of a little bonus fermentation. I think someone had a question over here. Is I probably saw a hand raised.
How do you feel about open air fermentation, like the steams and stuff?
It's cool if it can be done. I mean, I don't trust our ambient air, and I mean, we keep a pretty clean brewery, that I don't trust the open air of it just because it was a vinegar factory before. So it's like, I don't want to make vinegar beer anytime soon. I knew a few friends that tried it in homebrewing level, and I had one day, it's like, I strapped it to my truck and drove it out to this field one time and went to sleep. Like in a camping trip or whatever, and it didn't ever turn out really well. But I mean, it depends on where you're at. You know, you find most of the great fermentations that are open, either in super contained areas, like when they're doing like that resident culture, they have a really contained zone for it, or they have open fermentation for like at Sierra Nevada, where it's basically in their own little chambers. The open fermentation is really more so about leaving no pressure, there's no barometric pressure on it. Like the CO2 can freely come out of it, so you don't.
I've pitched yeast and just used a towel over the top instead of my airlock.
Oh yeah. So I thought you meant to like get spontaneous fermentation.
No, I mean.
Yeah, it's nice. And again, it depends on what you're trying to get out of it. Some beers do really well with that, like the less pressure, the less stress that's on it. You want that super clean fermentation. If you're trying to make like a cream ale or like a steam ale or something like that, then that's fine. If you're wanting it to have some of that ester push or something like that, you're kind of going the opposite way. That's why you see a lot of times with a lot of Belgian fermenters or sometimes German fermenters will be on their sides. Is to change the barometric pressure from the geometry of the tank itself. It increases that and also increases the surface area of where the yeast can actually settle down. So you increase that ester push of it as well. Yes.
Another question, Chad. Let's say you've got your brew going and you've got your mash temperature right, you control your yeast pitch right, and then you end up with a stuck fermentation. You missed it by about 5 or 6 points to where you want to be. What would you recommend to actually get that down?
If you see it start slowing down before, well, once again, this is one of the great things about if you're regularly checking your fermenting beer, because it really shouldn't take an extreme long period of time unless you're lagering something for a while. If you just have a gigantic beer that takes forever. So if you see it stalling out, say if you started a beer out at 12 Plato and it's supposed to finishing, or let's say it starts at 10:48 and it needs to go down to like 10:10 and it's stopping at like 10:35 and it was 10:35 one day and the next day it's at 10:33. You can always try to build up another pitch of yeast, but you need to really over pitch at that point because you already have an alcoholic environment established, and it's going to have to fight with the already now flocculating out of suspension yeast. Another old simple trick, if it's just needs to drop a little bit, is to rouse the crap out of it. Get the yeast that may still have some fight in them that have possibly settled down or not have been as active. They can get resuspended and run from there. Don't try to like re-oxygenate it or anything like that, because then you just oxidized the crap out of your beer. I think that making another pitch of yeast that was really a really heavy, hearty point of it that also has a high alcohol tolerance, which when you're shopping for yeast, they will tell you your alcohol tolerance is either high or medium or low or whatever. So that usually helps if you're trying to restart a fermentation, or even like the champagne yeast to get it to dry out some. But if it's just starting to slow down and it's almost there, basically rousing the carboy to kind of get everything back up its suspension, sometimes can let it drop down those extra couple points. Yes, sir.
How do you test your oxygen?
We have a little device that's an oximeter. You just stick it in, wort flowing over it, and it measures it. I don't know you can get oxygen applicators that have the little flow meters on them to kind of give yourself a standard to follow on. But unless you have some sort of a meter, it's made by Hawk. I think it's like $500, I think, or something like that. But you just stick it in there, and it can read exactly how many parts per million you're running off of it. But as far as like smaller applications are concerned, if you're running pure oxygen into it, you could just do trial and error, because obviously you're going to need more for a higher batch. You can just, all you need to do really is see the wetting pressure in it. So whenever you can see, if you're having it submerged into the fermenter as it's filling up, once you get it engaged enough to where you can see the gas come out of the stone and actively make like a pillow around it, that's what you've hit the wetting pressure on it. And that's usually a good threshold to start from. The vast majority of beers that we do, like once we hit that, I'm almost always going to have, at least in our system, and when we were able to measure it at our old spot in the same way, once we hit that wetting pressure, it's we're consistently getting between 12 and 17 parts per million every time, and we just kind of fine tune it down from there. And it's almost exactly the same little spawn little flow meter thing, because the flow meter, it just shows you generally, like, I'm pushing this hard into it. It's supposed to be like milliliters per hour, but it's pretty hard for it to accurately relay that to wort flushing through it. So if you have a way to meter that out, or if you just start with pushing in to where you get the wetting pressure and doing it for 90% of the batch, just knocking out, maybe try another time and doing it for only half by the time and seeing if you're getting a drastically different sort of fermentation profile on it or not. And that way, like a lot of stuff in your home brew stuff, you can take total ownership. I was like, that's the way it works, because I know that's the way it works. You know, it's like you don't have a way to quantify it. You can just change that one variable a couple times on the same sort of a batch to see if you're going to get a drastic change up or not. Yes, sir.
I like the jam session better than the hop, drop, and roll, but I like them both. What's the difference between the two beers?
Well, the jam session is designed off of like a kind of hop-forward American Pale Ale. It uses about I want to say a sixth of the amount of hops in it. It does have Citra in common with Hop Drop, but other than that, it's mostly Citra and Simcoe. Hop Drop is Citra Amarillo, Centennial. Jam Session is got more specialty malts in it percentage-wise, so that you get a little bit more caramel character to it, a little bit more like an older world feel to it as far as the malt bill is concerned. It's not like Hop Drop has some specialty malts in it, but they're a very small percentage altogether. Like Hop Drop and Roll on our system is 4,200 pounds of grain. And of that grain, only about 400 pounds of it is actually specialty grain, whereas Jam Session is right over 3,000 pounds of grain, and of that, about 790 pounds of it is specialty grain. So it has a higher percentage of grain that are caramelized, and more for body, more for texture, more for flavor enhancement, and a lot less hop. So you're getting overall more balanced beer. That also helps as 5.1% alcohol as opposed to 7.2. So you're going to have a whole different, and that's part of the grain bill too. When you're doing a 3,000 versus a 4,200, you're obviously going to have a lot more sugar available in the 4,200.
Now, I haven't bottled in a really long time, because once I got my keg system, bottle conditioning beers, getting them to carbonate in your bottles. I know one of the reasons I went away from bottling was because I couldn't constantly get, oh, this bottle has great head, this bottle sucks. Yeah. Like, is there a way when you know, okay, if I put my priming sugar in now, or I waited too long, there's no more viable yeast when I'm putting my priming sugar in?
If you have a microscope available, you could actually check and be like, oh, I do have a couple of cells floating on here, and you can actually quantify that. The only other way I can tell you that you can make it more consistent is to basically seal your bottling vessel back up after you add that priming sugar and give it a really long, slow spin to make sure you get even saturation of the sugar. That's the only real way to kind of guarantee, aside from knowing for sure that 100% of the beer that went in there has, it's all consistent. That's one of the beauties of like a secondary racking, is that you can look at the tank and be like, all right, I got this little tiny bit of trub right down here. So you're not sucking up a bunch of trub and it gets into like 17 of the 40 bottles that you get, and all of a sudden they're these Belgian gushers and the other ones barely have any head at all. You know, or you know, most of them are perfect, and there's some that are bottle bombs or anything like that. So if you get really consistent pull into the bottling bucket, and then if you have the CO2 wanting and spray some on top of it, add your priming sugar and just cover it and give it like a nice big swirl to make sure it's evenly distributed. You can usually get the best case scenario for it in general. With us, you know, we force carbonate all of our beers, and we go into the cans already carbonated and whatnot, so we don't do any like, you know, can conditioning or bottle conditioning anymore at that point. But that's how I would do it from, you know, back in the day when I'd be squatting down by the kitchen sink, just like, you know, trying to get it to go in evenly.
So I'm just doing some math. You said 4,000 pounds of grain, and you said you run 1 to 4 batches a day on the 60.
Yes.
How much grain are you running for a week?
A week? I mean, just in general, just talking all grain, not just the specific types of grain. Probably in the 48 to 60,000 in a week, depending on the type of beer.
What are you doing with the byproducts? Do you take local farmers?
We have basically like 5 local farms, and we have 2 guys that are the pickups for them. One guy works independently up in Harrisburg, and then who's oddly named Joe Harris. We're like, do you own that place? He's like, yeah. But he's got this huge cattle farm there with the big maize and stuff like that. And then we have another guy who picks up with us who does, he basically works with like a conglomerate of farmers. So he gets the haul, and also we give him our holy pops, because we use some holy pops as well. And then he basically spreads it around and divvies it up to the different farmers himself. And one of his partners goes and picks up the spent grain at our old spot, because it's a lot smaller and he has a smaller trailer. And not one of them has given me a steak yet. 6 years of free food for those cows, not one steak. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I'm sorry if some of this has been kind of rambling and stuff. Yes, sir.
Last question. There's a lot of breweries coming up in the community, and not that I would think there's like a boom bust scenario, but going forward, how do you think you're going to be able to distinguish yourself and stay the primary and the most loved brewery with all these other breweries coming on? What's going to keep you in the forefront?
It's a great question. I think that my way I look at it is that you have to be 2 things that a lot of people are sometimes considering to be contradictory of themselves. I want us to be the most quality or QA assertive and consistent brewery, but in the process of being the one that gives you the most variety as well. When you go into our tap room, which this has a great variety on, by the way, good job. But when we go to our tap room, I think when I came out today, we had 23 different beers on draft. All of them are ours. And so we have this large variety of stuff going on. But all of our beers, whether they're done on the 10-gallon all the way up to the 60-barrel, they're all going through this similar type of QA process, you know, because we basically have this standard of like, if it's going to be a one-off or it's going to be a year-round, we want to all hold the same sort of quality that we check for. Not every beer is obviously going to taste the same, but if we constantly maintain this idea of we want to take every step we can to make it as good, if not better than before, and more efficient and better use of our ingredients, and we apply that to every beer that we do, what happens to the people that drink the beer, they may have like, oh, Cab is my favorite beer, or Hop Drop's my favorite beer, but once they start venturing to the other stuff, that may be a seasonal or maybe a one-off or something like that, and they're like, well, this is totally different, but it's just as good as far as the quality that I expect from it. It allows us to keep people excited with new one-off things. We release a new beer every single week, and we release a specially one-off large batch just about every single month and have 60-round beers and then 2 seasonals per season. So when we are doing all those different varieties, you can have your good old standby, whether it be Jam Session or Coco Loco or Hop Drop or everything like that, and then also look forward to what's happening on a weekly basis. And know that the same quality that we do for the stuff that keeps our lights on is going into the stuff that keeps us excited on the brew stand as well. So I think if that can get relayed more and more, even though there is a lot of great breweries coming in, I think that it will let the customers at the bars and the grocery stores know like we can depend on them to keep giving us some cool stuff, and that will be hopefully driven by the fact that the people that are going out drinking know that like they're not the newest cats in town, but the beer always tastes really good. So that's really the thing.
You need to be a stay lane pioneer.
Yes, exactly. Yes, sir.
The hazy IPAs that are out now,
Right.
what type of yeast are they running with that? For the
If you want the haziest thing possible, there's a yeast that I've seen is a yeast called London Fog. We did a beer with Lenny Boy that was called 50 Shades of Haze. Wasn't my name, and and that beer like it just wouldn't fall out. It wouldn't fall out at all. And like we actually had to cold crash it for like 3 extra days before we could really like get to the point where like okay, we feel comfortable kegging this now. It was just really super hazy. Another one that's been really common, if you use a clarifying agent like Polyclar or Biofine or something like that, you can make it fall out if you want to. If you just want the yeast profile of it, London Ale 3 is very cloudy actually. It has a very low flocculation level on it, and that's really easy to find. We currently use Burlington Ale. Burlington Ale. It's 095 from White Labs. On a lot of our Goodwill Hoppings uses it, and our Hop Experiment uses it, and we use it on our Southeastern style IPAs that we're trying to push, like True Grit and Corn Star, which came out today. But
Is that your name?
yeah, Corn Star was my name. And so was True Grit. They got corn in them, surprise. And, but they wouldn't let me label it like I wanted to, the Corn Star. but basically, that yeast is kind of like the new iteration of the Conan yeast, which was kind of considered the original one with Petty Topper. But when you cold crash it, it does fall out. So it does give you a more haze than like 01 does, and does give you more ester profile. But if you want that super chalky, really heavy, like soupy looking hazy IPA going on, then London 3 or the London Fog would probably be your best bets. Also, really heavy late additions on hops really just help keep the polyphenol haze going.
And then like how Stone has these Enjoy buys.
Right.
What are they doing there? Is it the yeast is still working and then it's going to...
Well, no, if they're doing it, if they have the Enjoy, was it the Enjoy before?
Well, there's a 7.4 out now.
Yeah. They do that on their general QA of their IPAs of their main line that they do on them. It's kind of like we do a can on date. A lot of places do an Enjoy by date or best by date. We do the can on date because I think it's better for you to know, like, hey, this was made right now. Because some people say, like, oh, our beers are good for the next year. It's like, I would never say that about Hop Drop and Roll ever. It's like, you get it younger, the better. So it's like, you know, it was made last week. Go on and rock it on, you know. But some places like, well, all of our beers are in a 4-month threshold or whatever, and they do that. So that was kind of Stone's way of being like, stop saving our IPAs. I know we're popular now. We have funny logos and stuff like that, but stop squatting on this IPA for 4 or 5 months. Like, enjoy it by this time, or don't worry about it. Or they'll do their sour ones where it's like, wait till this time, because they do actually have active fermentation going on it, and they want it to develop until that time for them to go. But the actual enjoy by is just they're really over propagandized version of like don't sit on these IPAs, please.
So if you had Hop Drop and Roll run it 45 days out and say
It's probably fine if it was cold,
Well,
but it's not the best it could be. You know, it's like I wish we could put like an enjoy by now on it, but it would obviously not help you out on that. But we can ours by the second, honestly, just because nerds like that. But so we actually put the day, the hour, the minute, and the second on it, like it would matter. It's all come from the same day. But yeah, like our IPA, and we do testing trials on QA for this too. And we actually incubate our beers once they go into can, so that we incubate them at like 98 degrees for a week to a week and a half. It simulates basically being on a room temperature shelf for about a month and a half to 2 months. So we can taste that and be like, well, nothing's wrong with it as far as there's nothing souring or anything like that. Because when you incubate it, you can kind of let bugs that they're in there to start activating up. But it also gives you an idea of, all right, this is what it's going to taste like at a month and a half old. And it's nothing wrong with it. It's just nowhere near what the quality of the product is. But then on the flip side of it, beers like our Coco Loco, every time I do a QA with Coco Loco, whatever the oldest Coco Loco is wins every single time. Everyone's like, that one's awesome. I was like, well, that's 7 months old. So it's like, it just doesn't rely on hops to be its flavor profile. So it's one of those things. Also with Hop Drop, with the specialty malts that it has, and it being a bigger beer, it tends to have more of a malty character to it than like our True Grit IPA, which has twice the amount of hops as Hop Drop does, but it's only 5.3% alcohol. Like, it actually holds up better on the shelf than the Hop Drop did, because as the hops fade on Hop Drop, its malty character comes forward faster, and that's not what we're trying to showcase on it. So, we trial everything. Jam session lasts longer, usually a couple of months or whatever, but the enjoy by idea is just, we try to educate people, like, depending on the style you have, you either drink it right away or you can sit on it for a little while, you know. So there's no like rule of thumb for it, and that's why we don't like to do the whole best buy to just blanket over the whole process, because it's not going to do the same thing from our IPA to our porter. Yes.
Last question. Is there GMO yeast out there, and are you
Yes.
guys thinking about using them?
I think there is GMO yeast. Actually, I don't know about GMO yeast. There is GMO hops, and most of them are somehow genetically modified. There is no GMO barley though. A lot of people ask me that. There isn't, and it's not for a cool reason, just because no one wants to pay the money for it. Barley is just below pineapples and bananas on international importance in food. If you want to know another cool stat, the goats in Russia eat twice the amount of barley that used to make all of America's beer. So it's basically just a cattle feed crop. That's basically all it's really good for. So no one's going to spend millions of dollars to be like, this genetically modified. It already grows fine. So I know there's not GMO with that. I don't know you don't ever see organic yeast offered up. You know what I mean? There are all these just different strains. So I don't know what the
with
degree
yeast, it's a small quantity. You could genetically modify it to give you the characteristics that maybe would be unique in the industry.
They obviously manipulate them in order to do that. They come out with new yeast strands frequently, but usually they have to be sourced and then isolated. So the modification level on the genetic period, I'm sure they're probably trying it. But on the international importance level of it, it's kind of low. You know, as far as beer yeast already does its job really well. So getting it to ferment faster might be nice, but you're only shaving a day or two off if that's the situation. Yes.
Last question.
Yes.
I was just curious, maybe a little off subject. I was just curious about self-distribution. If you can get like latest update on y'all's challenge on that.
Yeah, we recently, I want to say about 3 weeks ago, we got the approval for, I forget what the legalese always escapes me, but basically we went to go push the bill through in the House of Representatives to basically change the cap for the self-distribution, which if y'all don't know, it's 25,000 barrels of production a year. And that didn't go through. The bill went through, but it basically, the compromised bill took out everything that had anything to do with self-distribution. So after that, we basically, us and Old Mecklenburg and the Craft Freedom LLC that we made sued the state, basically saying it wasn't constitutional. And the first big step with that, after they build all their evidence, it's been about a year in since we did the actual suit, they basically bring it to a judge, and the judge goes, it's not worth our time, dismiss it, or there's not enough of a case to make this thing open or not. Or it says this is actually worth considering, we'll go forward from here. And they did approve it to go forward. So then we're in the next step of it, but there's a chance for them to appeal a portion of it, and for us to appeal that appeal. So there's still a ways to go on it right now. Right now we're coasting right around like 18,000 barrels a year, which is really aggravating because with our brew house we could make that system run probably 45,000 barrels a year easily, and with more tank build out probably be closer to like 55, 60. So it's frustrating, but at the same time it's a fight that we thought was the right fight to do from day one. Basically, we just never thought we would get there that quick. So we're going to be in a few bars in Noda, and then all of a sudden it was like we thought we were literally going to make 300 barrels a year first year, and we ended up making like 2,500. And then the second year we're like, let's go for 4,000, and we ended up making like 8,000. Like, how about we stop projecting? And just like and that's when we were like, oh my god, we're gonna hit that ceiling at some point and everything. But we've always been a local guy, like we were from a neighborhood. I live in Noda. Todd and Susie live in Noda. I met my wife in Noda. So it's like one of those things where we've always just wanted to be in our own backyard. And I would much rather us follow, if we were able to brew an unlimited amount of beer, I would much rather us follow the rule more so like New Glarus and be basically available all over North Carolina, spots of South Carolina. And basically like if you come to the state, you got to get our stuff. We want to be that dependable brewery that you can find, and coexisting with all the other small and large guys as well, and not have to worry about sending beers off to Oregon and stuff like that. I don't want to give them the Best Buy date once it gets over to them and everything like that. So and the other good thing too is, I think this is a great point that the owner of New Belgium actually said at CBC, which was the keynote speaker. She was like, you guys in all your other states make great beer already. There's very few areas in this country that don't have great brewers. Like, we don't need to go. We're not going to be your saving grace if we go outside of it. But, with us, we just always look at North and South Carolina. That's the only thing we've really concerned ourselves with. And after getting in the industry and seeing the logistical nightmare that it could take, I was like, that's fine with me. I'd love to just make good beer that we're proud of at consistent rates, and whatever volume satisfies the people that are right around us. So, yeah. Thanks, Sam. Thank you guys very much.
Not sure how we're going to adjust that.